Imagine that you're going on a long weekend road trip. You've got your bags packed, you've got the car fueled up, you've got snacks, maybe you've downloaded some podcasts or got an audiobook. Everything is ready to go, and you are feeling pretty good because you've been really productive getting ready. All of this planning is going to make your trip run really smoothly and ultimately be a success. But also, you haven't left home yet. You haven't actually started your trip, even though it feels like you've done so much already. And that's what we're talking about today. How to tell the difference between being in motion and taking action. And in this sort of trip example, there's usually a set date where you'll walk out of the door, you'll leave the driveway, and you'll go on your trip. But for so many areas of our lives, and particularly this is a struggle of mine, it's easy to get stuck in motion and delay taking real action, the type of action that moves you forward and closer to your goal. And let's talk about what's happening there. So, how can you spend more time taking action on the things that matter and not necessarily staying in motion? And the concept, I think that a really great way that this is described is in the book Atomic Habits by James Clear. Maybe that's something you are familiar with. And if you're not, then I highly encourage it. But this idea is that there's motion and then there's action. So, motion, both are important. Motion could be getting ready, preparing, coming up with ideas, maybe listing things down. But action is when you move things forward. And so, an example might be that you are planning a project and you get all of the tasks in place, you get the timelines in place, but you haven't actually started executing the project. If we think about an example with, say, a podcast, you could be coming up with all of the ideas, the different ideas for your episodes, what you're going to talk about, the format, where you're going to post it, doing research on all of that. But until you actually publish an episode, you haven't necessarily started the podcast. Same with if you wanted to get stronger and you decide to choose a workout plan, maybe sign up for a gym nearby, get your gear, but until you actually lift a weight, you've just been in motion. It's action are the steps that actually move you forward and help you leave the driveway, so to speak. And when I like to think about a journey where you are starting any journey at point A and ultimately you have a destination, maybe point B, all of the prep, which has its place. Prep can make sure that we start out on the right track, make sure we know where we're going, what we're doing. If you walk into a gym and you just wander around aimlessly, just kind of saying, I guess I'll try this machine, that's not helpful. So we know that prep matters, but all of the prep is sort of taking place at point A, and we're still staying here. We haven't actually left. So when the difference is that once you actually step out the door and you start moving in the direction, whether that is lifting a weight, publishing a podcast, executing the project, all of that planning is where we are in motion. And the reason that I think this is really important to understand is that staying in motion can be a little bit of a safety mechanism. And there are actually two things that I want to talk about, which is that motion can be misleading. It can kind of lead us astray a little bit, and we're going to talk about that. And the second thing is that it really can feel safe and act as a security blanket, and it might be a reason that we put off or delay or procrastinate on things that matter. So first, let's think about this idea of motion being misleading. And when I say that, I mean that when we are planning, when we are prepping, when we're doing all of that work, we're engaged. Our brain is engaged. We are thinking about the future. We are making a roadmap. Maybe we're solving problems. Okay, how is this going to work? What's this going to look like? Also, we might be visualizing the best possible outcome and what we can do to plan for that. And you can be really excited about what success will look like, what this will mean to you, all while having not left the driveway. Now, the example with, say, a podcast is if I am coming up with this idea, which I was for a while before I launched the momentum experiment, is that I kept thinking all the possibilities that I could do, what this could look like, what this could possibly mean for me and the work that I do. And it was so, so exciting. But until I actually published the trailer and put it out there, it was all just kind of staying put. I hadn't actually started moving it forward and creating the podcast. Now, the second one, the example I used around maybe going into a gym, you can start thinking about the possibility, what it's going to mean, how you're going to feel, and all of that. But until you actually get in there and start doing it, that's where you run into trouble. And in particular, I know for me, my brain really, really responds to things that are new, challenging, and just interesting. So when there's something that truly lights me up, a new project, a new pursuit, a new hobby, or something, I love that planning stage. I love prepping for it. It's highly motivating for me. All of these, my brain is lighting up. And it feels like I've accomplished so much. I even show friends my plans. I'll say, look at all the planning I've done. This is what I'm going to do. And I talk as if I've already started it when I haven't left at all. And so there's this feeling, this sense of satisfaction as if I'm halfway there, but I actually haven't even taken the first real step, the step that is going to start building slowly on it. And that's going to lead me kind of, I think, to this next point, which is really understanding that motion can feel really safe. And especially if we start to have this idea that preparation leads to success. And so we can start to feel like the more time we get ready is going to be the greater success that we'll have once we actually start. But there gets to this point where it's diminishing returns, where it turns into unnecessary delays and ultimately some procrastination. As much as we want or love this idea of a perfect start, that's not actually how this works. We know that you need to start taking action so that you can actually refine things and get better. I can't get better at a podcast until I get some feedback on how it actually goes. If you're at a gym, you can't start adjusting how things work until you actually try it for yourself. So we know that you can never be perfectly ready or have the perfect start. But this feeling of security, it means that by staying in motion and not actually leaving the driveway yet, you can't fail. So if you haven't started, you can't mess up, you can't get hurt, you can't embarrass yourself, you can't find out that you've actually made the wrong decision and maybe you should have chosen differently. So instead, you focus on how productive you feel getting ready, staying in motion, telling yourself that you're taking really valuable action, even though you haven't taken that first step on your journey. You're not actually getting closer to your destination. And I think it's really helpful for us to understand this idea of knowing the difference between the two. And I do believe that in this case, context matters. I think it's really simple. If we use the gym example, you're either doing exercises or you're not. So anything that's not exercising is motion. And once you're actually exercising, that is being in action. You could get pedantic and you could say, okay, but you need to rest, and that's an important part. Yes, that's true. But in order to get stronger, we actually need to have some resistance on our muscles. But there are some where it's a little more complicated. Even the podcast one, it's really multi-step. So if I am starting a podcast, I still need to do some things like landing on the title, setting up my feed, making some art, etc. Like all of that stuff has to happen too. So there is something productive about getting ready, and maybe it's two parts. And the other example I would use that's a little bit more multi-step is, let's say you want to publish a book. There are people who will say that, the outline, the planning, the ideation, that's motion, and sitting down and writing the words on the page, that's action. But there are others who say, well, it's not action until you actually publish your manuscript. So I would argue that there are certain cases where there are multiple steps along the path, and we just need to start to understand the difference. So what are some questions that you can ask yourself to notice whether you are sort of stuck in this motion trap that feels very safe and feels productive and satisfying versus actually moving the needle? And I would say one is, have I started the actual journey yet? If you're in the planning phases, but you haven't started executing, or if you've got a big list of the things you need to do and you haven't started checking any off, that's a really good sign that you haven't started the journey yet. Also, this idea of, are my actions moving me forward and closer to the end result? I actually want to use a completely fresh example, which is that as someone who runs training and runs workshops, let's say that I'm putting together a new corporate workshop proposal. I need to put that together. I need to actually create a proposal. I don't want to just go and reach out to someone and have nothing prepared. So that preparation is an important part of that. Maybe I am putting together a pitch deck that I want to then do some outreach. Putting together that pitch deck, it's an important part, but until I actually send it to someone, I haven't really left the driveway. I'm still at home and I haven't moved it forward because I have not reached out for someone to be able to actually respond to it. And I think that's the part where it gets a little scary. And I think that when you are hesitating, this is a sign that you are experiencing a psychological roadblock where if you keep preparing and you start to notice, okay, I'm hesitating to take action, I'm hesitating to start my journey. I could probably start right now, but I'm not. This is where I want you to get curious and start to ask, where is this fear coming from? Why am I scared of taking action? So, if we take a look at this proposal example, I might be afraid of rejection. I might be afraid someone just says no, and I might take it as a personal hit against me, or that maybe it means that I'm not valuable instead of the actual workshop is not a good fit for them. If I don't ask, I can't get rejected. And if you have, say, that fear of being rejected, then it makes sense that we might just keep on spending time planning and not actually moving the needle forward. But that's where you start to ask, where is this fear coming from? Why am I hesitating? What is it that is in my head saying it's not safe to go there? And what do I think will go wrong? And it usually comes from somewhere. These are not things that our brain just kind of makes up on its own. Maybe we have experienced being rejected before, or we know others that have, or we're just not 100% sure of what we're doing yet. And so we just worry about it. But often this means that we are ignoring evidence that might contradict the belief. So if I'm hesitating to reach out to people because I have pitched an idea and it didn't get accepted, I might tell myself, okay, but I've been rejected. I don't like that feeling. I'm worried about this happening. But what about the times that it was accepted or someone said, yes, I like that idea. Let's work together. Sometimes we can forget about the contradictory evidence that sort of goes against this belief that something bad will happen. And the other thing is that what is the first step that I can take that feels a little bit safer? So, in my workshop example, if I wanted to send it to someone who knows me well, maybe someone I worked with in the past on something different, send it to them where at least I know that if they say no, they'll say it kindly, and that this is an experience where it's not just that stakes aren't as high as other cases. So, what does that first step look like? So, instead of just focusing on the bigger picture or the end goal, that getting all the way to B from A, you could say, okay, what's the first step on my journey? And what's a way that I can do it that's safe? And also notice what happens. So I think the next time that you are feeling like you are caught up in this motion and you're not really going anywhere, you're not taking that initial action, be kind to yourself. Be curious about why you might be hesitating, and then just focus on a first step that doesn't have as high of stakes, something that feels like you're just kind of gently wading into it. You're just getting maybe to the end of the driveway or stepping out on the street. You're not necessarily launching into something that does not feel safe. That is the thing that I try whenever I notice that I am needlessly putting it off, that I'm delaying, and that really I'm letting fear drive me instead of stepping into the actual journey. Which brings me to a small update on momentum experiments, which the current one that I had been sharing about over the past number of weeks is around for myself coming up with a consistent strength program. And I have shared that I also have hypermobility, which leads to a lot of injuries. And I have been working with a physical therapist on a current injury that I have, but I do also have a specialist appointment. It's been sort of months in the works to figure out what level of hypermobility restrictions that I have and whether I may, in fact, have what's called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome or whether it's something else. And that is happening actually next week. So I want to take a little bit of a not a pause, but slow down my ambitions. And so I am focusing on working with my specialist, but also continuing to work with my physical therapist. So, healing my current injury, working with medical professionals to move forward at a pace that meets where I am right now. I'm sharing this because honestly, it's really frustrating. I have been wanting to be consistent with this for a long time, and I just feel like it's an endless bumping up against these just roadblocks over and over and over again. And it's not for the sake of not wanting to, but it is one of those things that is my current reality. So I'm trying to keep it in perspective, and actually sharing that publicly is a way to remind myself that, you're not always going to be able to see things through perfectly. No matter how much planning, we can't always predict what is going to happen. So, how do you reset your expectations? And in this case, making sure that I'm working with people who know a lot more than I do on this, and also getting their perspective on what could work or what will work for me in my own context. It's not ideal. I think when I first pictured sharing about this momentum experiment and finding something that worked and having a method that I thought was going to be effective, I and sharing it publicly is actually one of the modes that I like to use. But having that public accountability of saying I'm going to do something, that usually helps me to follow through on it. So coming back here and saying that this is really not this is really not working very well, that's hard for me, but I also think it's an important message that not everything's gonna be perfect or flawless, and even if you have public accountability, it doesn't mean that you won't still have some setbacks. So that's the update on there. I'm not giving up on this. I might eventually pause on giving updates on this while I focus on something else, while I tend to my injury, but because I said I would share about it, I wanna make sure that I'm coming back and cycling around. So maybe this is something that I kind of set on the back burner. That is something I had learned this idea of how we prioritize things. We can kind of think of things on the front burner or the back burner. And it doesn't mean that I am taking it completely off the stovetop, but it is something where it goes to the back, keep it warm while maybe I focus on something else that's a little bit suited towards where I am right now. And so perhaps in the next episode, I'll give you an update on a different momentum experiment of mine. But I want to hopefully give this context. And when it comes to the motion and action, maybe you can reflect on areas in your life where you've been caught in that trap, where it feels safe, you feel like you're being productive, you feel like you are doing a lot. And there is a place. Planning is important, but planning is not the only thing. And actually stepping out and starting your journey is one of the things that is going to help you to find and keep your momentum.